Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Global HR Forum 2021. My name is Kim Hyun-jung. I will be the moderator for Track C for today as well as for tomorrow. Once again, thank you very much for joining us despite your busy schedules. To our participants, both joining us online and offline, thank you very much for coming. In order to prevent the spread of COVID-19, we are combining on and offline, and we are conducting this in hybrid format. It would have been nice if we were able to see and invite many people as possible on to the site, but it's regrettable that we weren't able to do so. However, we will do our best to make sure that you could actually feel the passionate discussion that's happening on this very venue. And also would like to note that we are thoroughly complying with the quarantine guidelines stipulated by the government authorities. The topic of the Global HR Forum is Digital Transformation, ESG, and Sustainable Future. With the spread of COVID-19 pandemic, remote schooling, video conferencing has become part of our habit. And the speed of digital transformation is accelerating. And with climate change and natural disasters, we are forced to face the issue of sustainable future. In today's session, we would like to talk about the megatrend that's happening globally, and HR Forum is providing a venue where there could be very active discussion on these very important topics. I hope that the session would prove to be very fruitful for all of our participants. Without further ado, we would like to begin the first session of Track C. The topic for this session is strategies for training human resources in response to the climate crisis. With building concerns on the climate crisis, globally, there is a strong call for swift response. Countries around the world, in order to secure sustainable growth foundation, all of the countries are restructuring their economic and social structures around low carbon and economic friendly policies. President Joe Biden of the United States have also placed priority on policy response to climate change. In this session today, we would like to delve into creative ways as well as renewable energies and Green New Deal project, and key pillar behind all of that, which is really fostering human resources. Presenters are His Excellency Ine Jensen of Danish Ambassador to Korea, as well as Alexander Lerner, Counselor of German Embassy to Seoul, and Oh Sang-bong, Senior Research Fellow of Korea Labor Institute, and Nam Jae-uk, Associate Research Fellow from CRIVET. Our moderator is one of our co-organizers. He's the president of Korea Research Institute for Vocational Education and Training, CRIVET. So please welcome all of the participants with a warm round of hand. So I would like to now turn the microphone over to President Liu. Yes, good morning. As was just introduced, I am Jangsoo. I'm president of CRIVET. I would like to first begin by extending my gratitude to all the participants who are here offline as well as online for joining us despite the difficult times that we live in under the COVID-19 pandemic. The topic for this session is strategies for training human resources in response to the climate crisis. Climate crisis has become a global agenda. If you look at 10 or 20 years ago, it was just a topic of discourse. But this has become a reality for all of us. It's right in front of us. Not just for Korea, but countries all over the world in terms of economy, social, and political aspects. In all different domains and circles, there are concerns, and also there are processes to come up with policies and countermeasures to tackle such a crisis. The session for today, especially there are many different domains, social, economic aspects and political aspects, and as well as many domains that is related and in terms of the response towards climate crisis, but also in financial industries and in societies, the climate crisis has impact across all of the sectors. Also, with respect to labor, to human resources, climate crisis is posed as an important challenge, especially when it comes to human resources development, because climate change brings change in industrial structure, and that inevitably impacts the structure of the labor market. So firstly, the climate crisis or environmental related issues are driving a creation of new type of employment in these new segments and industries. And also, if you think about the traditional industries such as coal industry, which had negative impact on environment, those industries are bound to demise. And that actually brings a lot of jobless related problems. We need to be able to provide them with a new opportunity to retrain them. So all of these are issues that are caused by and impacted by climate crisis and has high implication on training human resources. Hence, we've selected this topic for the C-1 session, and I think it's a timely topic that begs for our discussion. So without further ado, we will go into right away the presentations. As introduced at the very beginning by our announcer, we have His Excellency Einar Jensen, who is the Danish ambassador to Korea, as well as Counselor of Scientific Affairs, Mr. Alexander Renner of German Embassy to Korea, will be presenting. And then we've also invited discussants. We have Dr. Oh Sang-bong from Korea Labor Institute and Dr. Nam Jae-wook from KRIVET, who will participate as discussants for this panel. Now, due to the time constraint, I would like to ask that our presenters spend no more than 20 minutes per presentation. And then to our discussants, since you would also be providing some supplemental information, I would like to give our discussants 10 minutes each. After the scheduled presentation and the scheduled discussions, we would like to receive questions from our online and offline participants. During the presentation and during the discussion, you can access the URL link at any time, and you can submit your questions. I, as a moderator, will take a look at those questions and pose those questions on behalf of our participants. Now, with that, I would like to begin the presentation. Would like to first invite His Excellency Danish Ambassador to Korea, Einar Jensen. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much to the organizers for inviting me here today. I will be talking about how leadership is changing Denmark into a low-carbon society and how to adjust our organization to green values in the future that are so important. I have chosen for you to touch upon a few areas. These areas is a little bit about a personal leadership that can mean a lot. I will talk about the story of Denmark's green transition, how we have achieved it from political will. I will give cases, what it means to areas of Denmark, not so densely populated, but job creation and so on. We'll talk about the jobs created, what it means with a new sector, as we heard this morning also. And we will talk about being a frontline mission. The Danish Embassy in Korea has been chosen as a green frontline mission to, serve as sharing information on the green agenda from Denmark. And then, of course, lastly but not least, the best strategy is having big visions. And I will tell you about our visions in Denmark. As a leader, you have the privilege truly to set the direction for the organization you are serving. As a Danish ambassador, I am standing strong on values such as gender equality and respect for minorities. But I'm also a strong believer in the green values that we have pushing so hard in Denmark. For me, it means that I have no such thing as a green division at the embassy. Rather, going green is a guiding principle for all of us. We all work in the same direction. When we engage in dialogue with various Korean stakeholders, green concerns should as a general rule always be addressed. When we buy products, sustainability shall always be considered. When we travel across your beautiful country, we shall take the train, and that shall be the norm, and you have very good communication and transportation in that sense. Therefore, my message today is that we shall take the responsibility for addressing climate change upon ourselves, and that goes for all of us. But I also believe there's a great demand for green values. When we hire talented young Koreans at the embassy, we just hired one this week again, they are often mentioning that they want to work for an organization that promotes green solutions. So today, the paycheck is no longer enough to get talent. Rather, the power of attraction also depends on your willingness to work and address the climate change that is upon us. My own journey as a leader, I just want to say a few words about, because I was not meant to maybe focus so much on the green side and the green agenda as I have been ending up doing. So maybe to just give you an idea, I studied agricultural science. Back then when I went to university, nobody cared about much about pollution from nitrates or pesticides and so on. But today, the focus is very much on the agricultural sector in Denmark, how to reduce emissions, and the targets in Denmark for our agricultural sector is between 55 to 65% by 2030. So what I did not learn back in university, the young students are learning today on the future. When I later joined the diplomatic service 20 years ago, there was very little focus on the energy side. We had some small parts of our Danish development assistance that were focusing on the green agenda, but not much. That has changed a lot, and we have now looking into adaptation to climate change, in some of the developing countries, how we can help them set up wind farms and renewable energy and solar plants. So I think it just shows that, over time, you might not have the right qualifications in the beginning, but you gain them as you go along. If you have an open mind, you can learn and you can work on these things. It's about lifelong learning and adapting to the needs out in our society. Now a few words about my country's leadership. I will briefly tell you how our country, or the story of Denmark's green transition, in order to put our own journey into perspective. What you see in front of you of the slides is a black barrel on the left. In 1970s, we were totally dependent on fossil fuel, mainly oil and coal. We had a big debate in the 80s whether we should go the nuclear way or not. We decided no. We had actually had a national referendum whether we should do nuclear power or not. So we ended up taking the renewable energy route, at the same time also developing our oil and gas resources in the sea. So 40 years we have spent developing renewable energy on wind power. And today we have the biggest wind turbines in the world. Next year they're going to test the 15 megawatt offshore wind turbine by Vestas. But it's also a story about how the Danish political parties joined hands, made agreements, stayed a steady course focusing on renewable energy, passing legislation, making it possible for renewable energy to come in and take up such a big path. In 2019, we passed a legislation demanding 70% emission reduction. It was unheard of because I think 70% by 2030. Korea has just done well about announcing 40% NDC now by 2030. It's a great achievement because you still have a long way to go. But we are out in the very forefront, as you can say. We will stop, being dependent on fossil fuels by 2050, like the announcement from Korea. So we are on the same tune about that one. So I think for us it's about constantly have the political will to drive the direction in the right way and focus on the green agenda. Let me also just say a few words about the story of green transition when it comes to electricity in Denmark. What you see in front of you now is the time span from 1990 up till today. Going back to 1990, we only had 5% renewable energy. You could see all of it was black at the bottom. As we move up the years, I think we had about 25–30% in 2005 or around about that. Now we have 70% of our electricity that comes from renewable sources. The main source is offshore wind, and then we have biomass, biogas, and solar taking up a great share. And as I mentioned before, we have an act that pushes us to 70% reduction. We believe we will have 100% green electricity by 2028, and we are not stopping there because we want to go 150, 200%. That's a vision that I will come back to a little later. Now looking at greening is mainstreaming. I think a key aspect behind the green transition in Denmark stems from the overall political consensus and public support that is behind it. No matter whether you belong to a Liberal Party or Social Democrats, we have stayed the course over time. This means that the sustainability is included as a guiding principle without being met with loud opposition at any time. It gives us time to focus on what we need to do and move ahead. When new laws are made or older ones are changed, the proposal must account for the law's potential consequences for nature, environment, and climate. When we expand our energy sector, we strive to make it greener with renewable sources. And for us, we are fortunate to have a lot of wind. That goes for Korea as well. Korea has a great potential to place power stations at sea in the future. When we collaborate with other countries, we seek to include our strong position and solutions on the green transition in order to help others achieve the same result. We have, together with Korea and other countries, created a partnering for green growth and global goals, the summit that was held here in Korea this May. First summit was held in Denmark 2018. And that's showing the partnerships that will transform the world in the future. Likewise, Denmark takes pride in innovative solutions. In Seoul, Denmark has an innovation center that paves the way for cooperation in areas such as smart cities, clean air, circular economy, and of course offshore wind. Our green mainstreaming means that a lot of jobs in Denmark naturally deal with the green agenda. So it has been an opportunity for us, something that we actually did not realize in the beginning, but that I will show in a minute as well. Let me use one example from the port of Esbjerg. It's very near to my hometown. As you can see on the left, it used to be a fishing harbor with 800 to 900 fishing boats. Today there's only 3 fishing boats left, and they're quite big and cater for a few employees compared to what we had in the past. So it could have been a disaster for this port town, but in the meantime we have developed oil and gas in the North Sea. That will also diminish. We have agreed to stop using the oil and gas from the North Sea by 2050. And what you can see on the very right there is that now the wind turbines are emerging. This port alone has been involved in 55 offshore projects in Europe. It's the biggest port now for shipping out for installation of offshore wind turbines. 25% of the jobs in that town is related to energy. And this is only the beginning, because we're looking at the North Sea that will go 5 times or 10 times bigger in terms of offshore wind in the next 10 to 20 years. So if this little port town continues the development, it will be all green jobs you could say. A new opportunity for a port town that they have grabbed the opportunity and moved on. A few words about creating jobs and attracting workers. In Denmark, we have calculated that every time 1 gigawatt of offshore wind is built, it creates about nearly 15,000 full-time jobs. These are jobs from, construction of the turbines, to installation, to operation and maintenance over 20 to 30 years. So the fishermen we talked about before, they are now employed on the operation and maintenance boats that goes out to service these offshore farms. We have also found that 6% of the jobs in our private sector now is related to green jobs. 11% of our export stems from, offshore wind and so on, export. So in fact, you could say we have created a new sector, new industrial sector. We lost the shipbuilding industry to Korea. We should be crying. We're not really crying because we developed a new industry using the old shipyards for steel production and so on. Our youth is demanding, sustainability and awareness in jobs. So creating jobs for them is very important. Sustainable jobs and jobs where you are aware of the environment, social and governance issues. Good business today is RE100. Because we have 70% renewable energy in Denmark, we see RE100 companies coming to Denmark, setting up business, starting production in Denmark, even though we have high labor costs. It's because they want 100% renewable energy. That's what consumers are demanding nowadays. And it could potentially be quite a big obstacle for Korea, because right now you only have 5% renewable energy. And if in the future, very soon, there will be a demand for 100% renewable energy, how do you deliver that? So I can only recommend, let's work closely on installing a lot more offshore wind turbines for you in the future. Partnerships. A couple of words on partnerships. I think leadership is crucial, as we talked about before. And being a front runner in a certain areas is of course great. But it's also important to realize what the limitations are. Because sometimes limitation can stop you from moving fast and gaining upper hand in a sector if you want to do everything yourself. So in Denmark we found it's only cooperation that works. We might have used 40 years developing the nacelle, the top of the wind turbine. And that's why it is so great and reliable. But certainly Korea is number one when it comes to steel. So all the foundations, the towers by CS Wind, the marine cables by LS Cables and so on, are bought by Danish developers worldwide to be installed together with the Danish nacelle and turbine. So I think let's go together. And for the Korean market, we have calculated, if you want to do everything yourself, it's likely to be 22% more costly than if you do it in partnership and find the right partnership. If you find the right partnership, you will move fast and be the leader in Asia and create lots of jobs for a new area. I should also mention that we have close cooperation in a number of other areas like the shipbuilding sector. We lost the shipbuilding sector to you, but Maersk Shipping in Denmark is still the biggest container line. We buy the ships from Korea now. So we rely on you building the future ships, the ships that can be carbon neutral. And the first orders have been placed by Maersk Shipping in Korea. And the first ship should be available by 2024. So again, an example of great collaboration when it comes to CO2 reductions. Now, being a frontline mission, what does it mean? It of course means that we as an embassy must go green. We must be aware about our resources and so on, constantly. And we do that. And I think that can be small examples as, green utilities, less paper. When I was ambassador to Tanzania before coming here, we installed solar panels on our embassy. And we became, carbon neutral just with a few batteries, because most of your energy consumption is during the day, where there was sun every day. That's not an option here in the same way because we are in a high-rise building, so we do not decide what we put on the roof. But at least we can be cautious about how we live and how we move. I think as leaders we must take on the responsibility to ensure everyone is on the same agenda. When we have a new staff coming in, we always make sure that they know that their ideas are just as valid as older, experienced staff. In a traditional Danish hierarchy, it's very flat. So anyone can come up with new ideas. And we always want to maximize, you know, the green path we walk every day. As we learn more and more about what is needed and what is best for the green transition, we must impart to these new knowledges. We must continue to educate ourselves and improve our skills for the future. Going hand in hand with the green agenda is also the digital one, which is needed to navigate the digital world and new low-carbon tools and technologies. Denmark is one of the most digitalized countries in the world, and where we have emphasis on skills and greatly utilize the skills that are needed for it. Now, all these things might be obvious for many of you, but when we look into the future, we need to have visions. So I just want to share the vision we have in Denmark. We now know that wind turbines are getting so big, they can no longer stand on land, or they will be too difficult to have on land. You can imagine the wind turbine in Denmark next year will be 15 megawatts. Wingspan of 235 meters. It's a diameter. It's a giant. It also means that, you know, if you want to put up a small power station, you only take 10 of them and you have 150 megawatt. So imagine what we are planning to do in Denmark is we are going to build artificial energy islands. We will put artificial energy islands at sea. We will connect them to hundreds, thousands of big wind turbines. They will produce power led to the artificial island. It will be distributed to Norway, Denmark, Germany, Netherlands, UK. Whenever we have excess power, it will be converted to power to X. So you have hydrogen from these islands to be put on ships. You might have ammonia that you can use for ship fuel as well. So this is the vision for us in Denmark. We believe the future is power stations at sea and no more pollution on land. We will live a healthy environment. So I think my time is over now, and I thank you for listening. I look forward to our debate. 감사합니다.
예, 고맙습니다. 다시 한번.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Einar Jensen, for the presentation. Well, your content was very helpful, and you are also very punctual in terms of timekeeping. So as a moderator, I sincerely thank you for that. So Ambassador shared with us examples from Denmark, especially the last part about the energy island. I think globally, a lot of people will be highly interested in how this actually plays out going forward. In terms of specific questions, I think we will be happy to take questions from the audience during the Q&A. Now, moving on to our next presentation from Councillor Alexander Lenner from the German Embassy. Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much for having me here today. Good morning to everyone. After this presentation by the Ambassador of Denmark, I will, which was a rather broad thing about the industrial changes which all our countries will go through, and I guess the situation in Germany is quite similar to that of Denmark. I will focus rather on how can we produce these skills workers of tomorrow need for working in this environment, in these new settings which will be created by the environmental change. I will focus on education for sustainable development today. My presentation consists of 3 parts. First, I will briefly outline the ESD structure we have set up in Germany. ESD meaning Education for Sustainable Development. I will secondly speak about the implementation of the National Action Plan on ESD, and I will then introduce the German ESD Awards. I believe that the cooperation between the civil society and the governmental structures in Germany is something special and worth looking at. At the United Nations Summit in 2015, the countries of the world agreed on 17 Sustainable Development Goals in the 2030 Agenda. The 2030 Agenda is the foundation to connect the protection of natural resources worldwide with social justice, economic progress and cultural change. But how does the guiding principle of sustainability come into everyday life? How do our actions affect us and our environment? To learn about this, that's what ESD is all about. At the federal level, not only our ministry, I'm working in Germany for the Ministry for Education and Research, but the whole federal government stands behind ESD. The sustainable strategy of the federal government emphasizes that ESD should be anchored in all areas of education. The objectives are the promotion of education in sustainable discourses and the promotion of sustainability in education. Consequently, the German federal government attaches considerable political importance to the national implementation of the UNESCO goals. Already during the UN decade on ESD, that was from 2004 to 2014, thousands of people in Germany have set up diverse successful projects on ESD implementation. However, they were quite detached from the rest of the education community, which is highly complex in Germany, with 16 states or so-called Länder being in charge of education. At the end of the decade, therefore, we realized that ESD must be anchored more structurally in the education system, that we need to develop ESD further from project to structure. In 2015, we did just that with our joint agenda process. At the beginning, we were asking ourselves the questions, how can we succeed in bringing together all relevant actors in a structured process? Will we be able to agree on a common action plan? That was new and certainly an experiment. The ministry wanted to create a framework and was ready to organize and finance the process. Today we can say the experiment was successful. We developed a national platform. Hundreds of actors from civil society, science, business, the federal, state and local authorities worked intensely and highly productive for more than 4 years in 6 expert forums, 10 partner networks, as well as in the national platform. Chaired by the ministry and established in 2015, the national platform consists of 41 members at decision-making level. They included the main stakeholders of the German education system, such as the Standing Conference of the Ministers of Education and Cultural Affairs of the Länder, the Federal Ministry, the German Adult Education Association, trade unions, employers. All these people came together to develop the National Action Plan. The platform was supported by expert groups. You can see this here, and you can read out what the expert group was all about. This is just to show that they always tried to have an open process, to have an integration of many different standpoints, of many different professional standpoints as well. So they developed the National Action Plan on Education for Sustainable Development. You can download this action plan. It is on the web. Just Google it. And this is kind of the blueprint how to develop these ESD goals in the German education system. But how do we implement this? All members of the national platform serve as advocates of ESD, also within their own organizations and institutions. They have been called upon to propose commitments in order to support the implementation of the National Action Plan. So several hundred commitments for ESD in all areas and all levels were made, from early education to continuing education for employees and manager. We are building ever closer ESD ties along the education chain. We know how necessary this is when we hear and read on a daily basis, for example, about the effects of climate change. So let me give you some examples for the commitments for the different areas of education. We start in early childhood care and education. Most of you have probably experienced how the youngest are inspired by nature and its protections, how thoughtful they become when it comes to the destruction of livelihood and injustice. Our flagship foundation for early childhood education in Germany, the so-called house, the Little Scientist's House, has devoted itself to ESD. The foundation provides ESD training for professionals working in kindergartens and daycare organizations. They develop ESD materials and support the implementation of the whole institution approach on ESD. Their network includes more than 26,000 kindergartens, daycare centers, and elementary schools in Germany. Again, 26,000, just this one network cooperating on this. It goes on with schools. The school areas in Germany is always very complicated since we have a federal system. We have 16 so-called Länder, 16 states, and they all have their own school system. We do not have one school system for Germany, but 16. So it was important to get all the states on board and to work together with them. So they changed their curricula for the implementing of ESD goals in the curricula. And that worked quite well as well, especially the state of Baden-Württemberg, for example. It's in the southwest of Germany. It's the area of Stuttgart where all the cars from Germany are produced. And they attached very, very early to the process of implementing ESD in their curricula. I say this so you can see that even an area relying on the car industry and producing cars, which is not naturally very closely linked normally to ESD goals, even they think it is important to train your talents closer to the ESD things. So let me come now to what is most of the time most interesting in Korea for the people here, the technical and vocational education and training system of Germany. As you may know, in Germany, the proportion of people going to university is much, much lower than it is in Korea. And about 50% of the young people get what we call duale Ausbildung in the so-called dual education system. This means you go to school half of the week, and the other half of the week you already start working in a normal working environment, as you can see on the picture. You get paid already for your work, but you get also trained by your employer. This is very special. And we have special certificates for more than 300 different jobs you can learn. So you are trained very specifically for one job. So it is very important as well that you get in close contact with the ESD targets there as well. And this works very good. So the employers are very much interested in implementing these in the curricula at these special vocational training schools and so on, since they learned that it's also very important for their companies to have good people who are skilled in these things. And it is not just, when I am talking about skills, I mean people who are aware how important it is to keep environmental questions on your mind all the time. So it's about not just about how you use an instrument, but how you think about the environment, how you keep this in mind when you are planning a process, how much products am I wasting, and because every waste is a burden for our environment. So this is very important to focus on this in the training system, and when we're talking about human resources today, it is important to look at these jobs as well. But we have also, this is job related as well, also the German manager organization, they started ESD trainings for the managers. This is to keep in mind as well. So it's everyone in the company has to be aware of the importance of the ESD targets. So higher education, same as the schools in Germany, they are run by the states and they are very autonomous in Germany, but more and more universities and all important universities are committing to ESD goals as well, to education for sustainable development. It becomes a method of teaching, it becomes important to keep these things in mind for the students, not just in engineering sciences, but in all science. It is, you can make ESD also in fields in the humanities. How to think about your environment, how to think about books and everything. Which questions are you asking? All of this is ESD. The non-formal and informal learning is also important. ESD is not only important for children and young people, but for adults as well. The German Adult Education Association reaches people of all ages. As a commitment to the National Action Plan, it provides information materials on ESD for all 900 adult education centers in Germany and offers ideas for local implementations. We have youth forums in all education sectors as well. As in the overall policy process, youth participation plays an important role. Therefore, a youth forum and youth conferences were implemented. The young people constantly remind us that we need to act faster. The members of the youth forum also serve as a change agents to further motivate other young people for ESD. They are represented in the national platform and in the expert forums. They have their own budget to implement ESD projects, and they organize ESD conferences for young people. We also work closely with local authorities together. This is also part of the German education structure, but not just that they run very often the schools, but it is also important to have what we call a learning municipality, that ESD goals and targets are part of the way the whole municipality acts. It's not just about the administration of the municipality, but how things are planned, how the people are involved in planning processes. This is all fostered by ESD. And science and research. I'm not going to talk now about green energy or something like this. It is clear that this is very important for the sustainability goal, but I just wanted to say that we try to monitor our progress in the education field very close as well. And we have educational researchers developing indicators and trying to measure how good the progress on these fields is as well. This is a very interesting project, I would say. Since I think it's kind of unique that the government tries to cover this so closely. This is partly due to that the German Parliament, the Bundestag, even requested a report by the German government, by the federal government, to report once every 4 years closely on the progress of the implementation of ESD. And so we need figures and facts for this as well, and we do this in a scientifically process. So, coming to the ESD Awards in Germany, this is kind of a promotion agency, you can say, that different organizations can apply to become best practice example. The national platform is giving the awards to them, and this organization can be very small organizations, very small environmental group or youth centers or whatsoever, but it can be also whole municipalities. For example, the municipality of Gelsenkirchen, which is a big city in Germany with 400,000 people living there. I know this is not big in Korea, but for Germany this is already a big city. They applied as well to become an ESD city, and a lot of smaller cities do so as well. And all these organizations become very proud of the prize of becoming called for an ESD organization or an ESD city. They get flags they can put in front of their offices, and they are allowed to use the official sign of the campaign. And so this gives also a big push for people to engage in the process, to drive the idea and to get more people involved and to develop new ideas how we can go further on with these ideas. This is also important to keep in mind that this is not a process which ends at some times, because the challenges of the futures will be always new challenges. We do not know what's happening tomorrow. I mean, COVID-19 taught us this all in a very strong lecture. So it is important to keep the ideas open, to get people involved, to get things running, to make the change happening over and over again, and not having the idea that you can reach kind of the end point of the ESD and then you implemented it. So we even say we have different futures. We have to prepare the young people for, or not just the young, everyone has to be prepared for different futures, because we do not know what the future will be like. So I'm coming already to an end. I don't want to say thank you that early, but I want to encourage you to contact me if you have any more questions about ESD, and especially if you're from an organization who wants to have cooperations in this field with Germany, the government or other organizations as well. For us, ESD is an international process. You saw already that we hosted the halftime conference for the first decade. We had a big conference on ESD last summer in Germany. We tried to have it. It was rather online now. So we would be very, very happy if people from Korea contact the embassy. I will make the contacts to the German ministry for cooperation projects, for the exchange of the ideas, how we can go on. We are willing to share our knowledge, but we also want to learn from your experiences, because, as I said, there's not just one way to implement these things, but there are many ways and there are many solutions, and we have to be prepared for different futures. Thank you.
예, 고맙습니다.
Thank you very much, Councillor Renner. We've heard many insightful and interesting things about Germany in this presentation. As you have just heard, the German education system is benchmarked by countries around the world. ESD, or ESG as is more familiarly known to us, can succeed only through education. In responding to climate change as well as the ESG issues, these are all about the future and sustainability. And in determining the future, the key factor is education. From that perspective, it was very helpful to learn what the German educational institutions as well as the local and central government are doing. That was a presentation loaded with implications for Korea. Now we will proceed with the panel discussion. Dr. Oh of the Korea Labor Institute, I think we can give you 10 minutes for your discussion. If you need more time, perhaps we can follow up with Q&A afterwards. Dr. Oh, would you like to stand at the podium? And we have received a few questions online. These are great questions. And please feel free to upload your questions as they come to you. Good morning. My name is Oh Sang-bong of Korea Labor Institute. We have heard cases from Denmark and Germany, and I would like to talk to you a bit about Korea. When it comes to the UNFCCC, we are a contracting party. We are party to various international agreements, and the Paris Convention of 2008 is also something we're a signatory to. But until now, we have not been as active in participating in the global effort to fight climate change. During the past two administrations, the policy goals were announced, but the reduction target versus BAU was announced. That's about all you can say about it. Changes started to take place after 2019. We are now fully involved in the effort to become carbon neutral. The two countries we have heard about today, Germany and Denmark, earn our envy. 30 years ago, they've reached their climax in carbon emission, and since then, they've been continuously working to successfully reduce their emission. The Danish case is very interesting. At the same time, we are green with envy. The port city that was transformed into the new center for offshore wind power generation. We don't have the likes of the Danish companies for turbine manufacturing. We sometimes get typhoons, and otherwise we get soft winds. Technology-wise, we have a manufacturer, but their technology requires improvement. There are petrochemical companies that export 60% of their production. That's all we have. Wind power generation is not enough for us. We don't have the state-of-the-art wind power turbine manufacturing technology, and there are companies that form the basis of our industry who find it hard to reduce their emission. It will not be easy to achieve the reduction target, but we can no longer turn a deaf ear to the global effort to reduce emissions. Our effort alone serve to lift us from poverty to become a industrialized country, but to achieve the same in climate change and emission reduction, we need the same level of hard work. We need to predict and prepare against what's needed in the future. We have Doosan Heavy Industries and one other company that produce wind turbines, but their technology needs to be improved. In designing future automotive vehicles and manufacturing the necessary components, we need the necessary skilled manpower. Building management, smart building management requires more talent in that regard. The new facilities in the manufacturing of the future require new materials and new technologies. To that end, we need engineers who undertake that education and training. We need to prepare the developers and engineers that will be much needed in the future. To become carbon neutral, there will have to be corresponding changes in the job market. The recent government announcements reflect this. We will no longer have workers. We will have workers whose jobs are unsustainable. We will have new jobs that were not seen in the past. Other workers will have to acquire new skills to stay in their current jobs. Workers would prefer to find new jobs where they can use the old skill set, but that will not be the case. Many workers will have to learn new skills. And to provide those new skills and the relevant training, we need vision into the future. We need more systemic education and training. If you look at the EU, the US, and the OECD, most of the jobs affected by carbon emission require a little change in the necessary skill sets. A well-designed education system is important in our transition to carbon neutrality. It requires a long vision. Sometimes it requires rapid response to the quickly changing labor market situation. The cases shared today will be reflected in our future policy making and discussion. Thank you very much for the two presentations.
오성봉 박사님은
Thank you, Dr. Oh. He's an expert in labor market, and also he used to work with Energy Economic Institute. So I think that he has a career path that's most relevant to the topics that we are discussing today. Now, moving on to our second discussant, Dr. Nam Jae-wook. He recently wrote a report on human resource training with respect to carbon neutrality initiatives. And so I have high hopes for him and for his future, but let's invite him for his presentation. Yes, good morning. As introduced, I am Nam Jae-wook. It's a great honor for me to be part of this panel. And thank you to Ambassador as well as Councillor Leonard for their presentation. And it's a great honor for me to be sharing my views. Whilst I was listening to the presentation of our two speakers, there were certain things that came up in my mind. So I would like to just share with you my comment and then end with some of the questions to the speakers. And then would also like to select one or two key priorities for Korea. Ambassador Einar Jensen and Councillor Leonard shared with us their cases of Denmark and also Germany. I would have to say that these two countries are the front runners in their responses towards carbon neutrality. And one of the things that came up in my mind was the green mainstreaming. Now, green transformation must become a mainstream of the policymaking process. If you look at Korea, our approach is that it's all about changing our existing institution, existing policies. We think of these green issues as totally separate and independent from all the existing institutional bases. But people say that that's not the case. Digital transformation actually impacts all of the industries. It's a general purpose technology. And so the carbon neutrality and green aspect really has impact on all of the aspects of people's lives, not just on the so-called environmental industry. I think that's one thing that we should really keep in mind. For Denmark mentioned green mainstreaming, and in Germany, I see that the ESD has been very deeply embedded in the systems and structures of education in Germany. And when we talk about green skill, which is related to green transition in terms of proficiency and skills, now these skills are not just about skills in the renewable energy industry, but in all of the jobs and occupations, how can we actually reduce the waste as much as possible? So I think from that perspective, green mainstream also has some of the implication. And I think although both presentations did not really mention this in detail, and I will come to this later because I am researching this domain, and that aspect is the participation of the stakeholders in the green transition and green transformation. If you look at their presentation, there's a lot of talk about partnership, leadership, and in Germany, there are multiple agencies, organizations, and stakeholders all participating in the ESD initiative. I think in this domain, there needs to be a very broad-based partnership and discussions across different stakeholders. And I think for Korea, this has a very strong implication. This is an aspect that we also need to a very close attention to. I would like to now move on to a couple of questions. In both of the presentations, when it comes to lifelong learning, I think that was an aspect that we also have to place a lot of interest in. The twin transition, which is DX and green transition. I think the common denominator between these transformation is to have people go through education and training, not just during their schooling age, but in their entire adult lifehood. I think in that aspect, lifelong learning is important. But if you think about lifelong learning, especially in Korea, but also in Europe, if I look at the statistics of European countries, the participation rate of lifelong learning, there's a big gap depending on which group you look at. And I think that we need to try to narrow that gap. And in this transition, the so-called low-skilled laborers and people working in smaller companies, we see the participation into lifelong learning is low. And I think that this also is an aspect that has to be considered as one of the priority of the policies in terms of lifelong learning policies. So I think when it comes to green transition and for lifelong learning, I would think that Denmark and Germany also has some of these experiences. And what are you doing in your respective countries to reduce that gap of participation in the lifelong learning, especially from the low-skilled or other vulnerable groups? And then moving on to Germany, in TVET, I think Germany is well known for its best practice in terms of the dual system. that Germany employs for digital transformation and green transition. So the so-called in twin transition, I think the dual system is going to have a positive role, because when there is such a transition in technology, basically you need to have a very good integration between the education as well as workplaces, and then there could be a good training for the skills, and the human resources that receive the training can actually bring about and facilitate change in the industry. So I think the dual system would have a positive impact. But on the other hand, let's say the university advancement rate, you said, is not as high. Now, with technology transition and green transition, there is STEAM education, and at higher education, there seems to be more emphasis on giving people more advanced level of skills. So in that aspect, does Germany not feel the need to change your dual system that you've employed to date? And in this changing, disruptive environment, do you think that dual system has proven to be very positive, or do you think that it begs for some improvement or enhancement? So if time allows, I would like to get an answer from Councillor Leonard later. Last but not least, as a person researching Korea and the issues that we face, let me close by saying that when I look at European data, one of the things that really hit me has to do with the youth, the young people. There are many characteristics of these young people in Europe. And one of that is that they have high awareness on environment, and they are very active in driving green transition. Sometimes European youth, they go on in a so-called environmental strike. And I hear that young people, basically, they have high awareness, and they really look at the type of workplaces that they want to select to work, because they consider environmental awareness as to be very important. I know that Korean young people would have that awareness too. However, if you look at the so-called Generation M, Generation Z, if we think about climate change, climate crisis, or green transition, I really don't think that our younger generation really places much emphasis on the environmental issues. So I question as to why that is the case for Korea. And also, in terms of green transition, I think maybe we're a bit too short-sighted on this issue. I'm not saying that green transition is not an urgent issue. It's just that by 2050, we have net zero target. That means that our next generation is then going to be, because it's 30-year period, next generation is going to be in the labor market. So the younger generation, when it comes to green transition, they need to have their value set. They need to have their awareness. How they view this is very important. So it's not just about training people for the green-related skills, equipping them with green-related skills. I think that's a bit short-sighted. I think from a more fundamental perspective, we have to think about how we could really up the sensitivity level of the so-called green value and green transition. How do we make sure that the younger generation, even children, we've heard a case of Germany. They actually have this ESD-related elements for the kindergarten kids as well, in the schooling system as well. So I think that not just training for a special occupation or job requirement, as I mentioned at the very beginning, the whole green transition related element has to become mainstream across all of our educational system. Another issue that I want to raise is the stakeholder participation and how weak that is in Korea. I think the digital transition and green transition, the way people view this, and the biggest difference between the two is that people think the green transition is all policy-driven. In actuality, if we look at reality, yes, the government comes up with environmental regulation. They set up environmental-related policies. And then markets and industries comply with that. They change. And there's also training for that. And there's support for the workers. So it's highly likely that people would think that this is policy-driven. But if you look at it more fundamentally, individual countries' policies is also subject to global cooperation, and then there is the whole global climate-related constraint. Anyhow, people consider green transition as policy-driven. So people, from layman's perspective, it's very important that you have to actually participate, you have to provide your support, you have to really cooperate in the process is all the more important. But if you look at Denmark and Germany, basically there's agreement at the industry level and social level where there is a common thread that cuts across. I think in Korea we have that link, a very weak link in Korea compared to the European countries. As Dr. Oh mentioned, understanding the information in the labor market and really connecting with the industry and the labor market and the education, there needs to also be active participation of both the unions as well as the employers. We need active participation of both the employers and the employees and the labor union, and I think that's something that we need to really work on. And as mentioned during the presentation, I think therefore leadership is important. Education and training is very important as well. Thank you. I think my time is up. Thank you for the presentation.
예, 고맙습니다.
Thank you very much. He provided his comments as well as questions to the speakers. We will now begin the Q&A session. We have taken many questions online, so it's taking me some time to get through them. So this is how we'll proceed. We have about 20 minutes left, 20 to 25 minutes left in this session. And our two speakers will have to respond to the questions.
토론에서
And Dr. Nam has asked questions about inequality in lifelong education and how these are addressed in Denmark and Germany. That was Dr. Nam's question to the two speakers. And the second question was about Germany specifically. The German education system, in the face of new changes such as ESG, will the dual German education system, which has been lauded for its success until now, be able to succeed in this new era? The dual system has strength, and what will be its strength in responding to the challenges of the future? That was the second question for the German case. We will provide on the screen the questions asked by the audience. To the Danish ambassador, there are some questions, as well as for Councillor Renner. First, the questions for the Danish ambassador. This was a question I wanted to ask you as well. What are the possibilities of the negative impact on the environment that this artificial man-made island that you have mentioned will have? In other words, you mentioned the artificial island, which we believe is a very creative solution. Will there be any negative impact on the environment in making and operating this artificial island of offshore wind turbines? We are doing this to protect the environment, but in the process of making and operating this man-made island, will there be any negative impact on the environment caused by the man-made island of offshore wind turbines? That was the question. The second question to Ambassador Jensen is, it's on the screen, but it's in Korean. In your presentation, you mentioned that it was difficult to install solar panels on the roof of the embassy, so you're pursuing carbon neutrality through other means. May we ask exactly how the Danish embassy in Korea is working to achieve carbon neutrality, other than the solar panels, which proved to be difficult and impossible to install on the rooftop? And the questions to Councillor Renner.
이중
Yes, this question relates to the dual education system. The questioner said that it's very interesting to see a dual system in Korea, from a Korean's perspective, because some Korean students actually take up this topic to study into this system. So, at what age do you first start to experience a certain job, and what types of job can a person choose? I'm sure that there will be so many different types of jobs. So, what types of job would this person be able to experience, and at what age? And then, how do you help these people select the jobs that he or she is interested in? So to involve this person and to have this person think what types of job he or she likes. I mean, of course, it would be up to that individual to select a job that he or she likes, or it could be, advice from parents or from the recommendation from the school. I don't know. But in terms of the government level or municipalities or the school system, how do you systematically help that individual in the journey of finding the job that that individual is interested in from a systems perspective? So that's a question to you, Councillor Leonard. And then moving on. Just 1 minute. There is one more question, but I think I would be able to get back to that later and decide whether I will ask this question or not. So it's a question that was just submitted, so I think I need a bit time to understand what this question is about. So why don't we do this? We will go in the reverse order. So I'd like to invite Councillor Alexander Leonard to first respond to the questions that you received. And then we also have Danish ambassador, since I know that it's a special occasion for us to speak to you. So I'm going to ask Ambassador Jensen to respond at the very end. So, Councillor Leonard, please, with your answer.
For the questions. It's always good to receive questions. I will start with the dual system questions. First of all, at what age do people go in the system? This is not a one-way path which just leads in you. You can leave school in Germany, you can leave normal school in Germany after the 10th grade if you want to, and then you would join the dual system. We have, or what is it in English? You have to go to school until you are 18, but these vocational schools are regarded as schools as well. And but you also, a lot of young people also go into the vocational education system after having completed their full 12 or 13 years of school, which also would allow them to join one of the universities. But because of the very good prestige of these vocational training jobs in Germany, quite a lot of people choose to go rather to vocational training and do the career on this. As I said, there are hundreds of different jobs. And how do you pick one? Well, this depends. First of all, you need an employer who is employing you. You have to find someone who is convinced that you are the right person for the job. So most 16, 17-year-old boys who leave school and want to join the vocational system want to be car mechanics and want to repair Porsche and Mercedes, but this is obviously not working for everyone. So there is a procedure of how people find their employer. They have to apply, as I said, and since employers in Germany are looking for young people joining their companies, in the end, right now, everyone finds one of those employers and can join the workforce with the age of 16, 17, around this very often. The next question related to this is, when I remember right, how does the digital transformation and the green transformation interact with the dual system? And I would say that the German dual system is able to react very fast and very efficient to the new challenges of the world. Since the curricula for these jobs is not just developed by the government, but it is developed jointly by the government, the employers and the trade unions. We have what we call social partnership in Germany. This means that the trade unions and the employers work in a lot of fields very closely together. And if you look at job profiles, for example, those are developed most of the time together jointly by employers and trade union, and they go hand in hand in developing these. So if jobs are changing because of the digitalizations, both sides, employer and employees, have a very high interest that these jobs get modernized, to get put new inputs in it, to be able to react very fastly. Right now, a big problem is, I mentioned already, car mechanics. They are all trained in repairing gasoline engines. But we all know in a few years they must be able to repair electric engines. So they need to have new kind of trainings, new specifications in the job. And this is done jointly by the government, by the employees and the employees together to develop the new education curricula for these jobs. I hope this answers these questions. And the other question was on how we can assure lifelong learning. Yes, we have the same problem as everywhere, that those who already have learned a lot in their life are rather willing to learn even more, and those who didn't learn that much in their life are not so much interested in learning, and it's more difficult to engage them into lifelong learning. I guess that's kind of a schemata you can find all over the world. It is not easy. It is not easy. It's everywhere, and we have problems as well. We do not have a very high attendance rate in lifelong learning in Germany for the adult population. But again, as I just gave the example of car mechanics, also you can find now the big car manufacturers in Germany trying to reorganize their production technology. This is jointly done very often with the trade unions. Everybody is encouraged to join in. And to learn about the new requirements you have to fulfill to be in your job successful. I also want to mention that ESD, or education for sustainability, means more than to be able to react in the job rightly. So it is in general interest in environmental questions, in questions of worldwide justice as well. And this is why informal learning settings are very important as well, to reach out to people in different situations, in television programs, in municipalities, in the zoo, I don't know. There are a lot of possibilities where you can interest people in how they can become more sustainable in their habits. For example, gardening is very good example. A lot of Germans have small gardens. Even if you live in a high-rise buildings, they have somewhere in the city a so-called Schrebergarten where they do a little bit gardening. You can talk to people and get them involved in how they can use their garden in an ecological good way. Do they have to have a lot of plastic in there and all this stuff? What can they do to have more birds in there? All this means educational environment, and all this means lifelong learning. It's not just the job. I think this is something quite specific for Korea, that you are looking at education very often in a very pragmatic way, that education leads to a job and that you have to fulfill this, and it's a pyramid and you have to go up that as high as possible. I guess at least in Middle and Northern Europe, I guess you would agree on this, education is something more. It is something which is expected to make you happy, to make you smart, and to make you a part, to give you the possibilities to join into discussions into society. It is an important part for democracy as well. And I think especially if we talk about environmental questions, this is extremely important to keep in mind. How to engage people in environmental behavior, how can they learn that it is good for them to behave. And talking about curricula and environmental behavior, I'm always puzzled when I ride a taxi in Korea, how much energy the taxi drivers waste by accelerating very fastly and then using the brakes right away to stop the car or to slow down the car. Every time this is a waste of energy. Every time they hit the gas pedal that strongly, it shows that they have not learned enough about ESD. They waste energy, they waste money, and it simply shows that gasoline is too cheap in Korea, obviously. And it is always if you join a taxi. And this is kind of an example of how these things have to be integrated in every job. Someone who's baking bread, which is important in Germany, more important probably than in Korea. How to use the oven in an efficient way not to waste energy. It is not just about creating new jobs in the field of engineering. This is important as well. But to get this idea in everyday life, in every job, to save energy, and then you can more easily be more progressive in installing wind turbines, because then you do not have to care about the energy price because you can see this as an element for the modernization of your society. I think that's enough for right now.
예.
Thank you very much for the comments. I will start with the education side. And let me tell my own story, because I come from a smallholder farm on the western side of Denmark. I decided to stop school after 10 years. So you can ask the question, why am I sitting here today? It's because we in Denmark have what we call adult education. You can anytime step back and actually do your high school. So that's what I did. I worked in a plastic factory, I worked as a forester. And then I stepped back and did my high school. In my class was a cook of 29 years old. The oldest one in the class was a farmer, 53 years old. Both of them finished their high school and did university afterwards. So it's an example of you can step out, but you can go back into the system. A new chance. Another thing I want to mention here is that what is great for us is that we have a flexibility and security system. Some of you might have heard about it from our former Prime Minister sitting on the first row over here, Lars Løkke. He explained it this morning. We have a flexible working force that you can hire and fire people quite easily. The security is that you get 2 or 3 years of unemployment if you are fired, and you also get an opportunity to more education. So let me take the example that I used before. Denmark should be crying because we lost the shipbuilding industry to Korea. Now we are not crying because the workers from the shipbuilding industry, we took them back and educated them to build wind turbines. So the same workers are now working in the old shipyards, doing different things, and actually brought us into a new sector and new job creation for us. That is what we do of retraining and teaching people that have been in the workforce maybe for 10, 20 years. So I see that as a very important step, Mr. Nam, to talk about, the further education, that lifelong learning. You also asked me about, what about the energy islands? What is the environmental effects of that? I cannot give you a clear answer yet, because we have 2 islands we are looking at. One is not an artificial island, so it has been there for many years. So we will connect wind turbines to that. That's on the eastern side of Denmark. On the western side, it's 80 kilometers to sea. We are planning to build the artificial island. And the seabed in Denmark is a little bit like the west side of Korea. It's shallow ground. So we have some areas where it's maybe only 20, 30 meters deep. And it will be possible for us in that area to build up an artificial island, and we can connect to us. The point for us is we need a place to actually produce power to X. The big developers from Denmark, Ørsted and Copenhagen Infrastructure Partners, they're building the wind farms, but they're also concerned about how to convert the excess electricity to power to X or hydrogen. Hydrogen you'll need for your cars and so on. So that's the whole idea about the artificial energy islands, that you create so much energy produced in one area that you can convert it, what you do not need, in the countries, and we have the pipelines to other countries. So environmental impact assessment will be done before they will be built. So of course we will try to minimize as much as possible, but it will still be far at sea, away from any human beings living on land and so on. You could say we still have the fish and fish resources. In Denmark we have settled it very much We have good debates with fishermen on where to place our wind turbines. I have arranged also for Danish Fisheries Association to speak to Korean Fisheries Association about concerns here in Korea, what to do. We have done several of these workshops now, and we'll continue to do that because we have some learnings that we want to share. Then I should also say that to you, Mr. O, you were a bit sort of concerned about the supply chain, or concerned about, can Korea do this, be the front runner in Asia on offshore wind? I believe you can, but you have to realize, like we realized in Denmark, we cannot do everything ourselves. If we want to do everything ourselves, we will not have the best quality in all aspects of what we do. But if we combine our efforts, we will have the best, and we will be the leader and the front runner. So that is why Denmark is buying, CS wind towers producing by steel from Korea. That is why we use LS cables, marine cable, at our windshore parks and so on. And that is why we see that Samkang on the south coast of Korea is building foundations that are being shipped to Taiwan, where the two big Danish developers are doing huge wind farms. So collaboration is the point. And when you do collaboration, you cut the cost. We found 22% you can cut the cost, and you can quickly become among the world leaders and move. You can be the supplier in Asia. I have no doubt about that. Because you have all what it takes. You have your shipyards. You can build up that supply chain very quickly. So all we want to do is collaborate and work hard on that. And that is probably the biggest effort I think our embassy can contribute to. Sharing the information, sharing the links to those who have the knowledge in Denmark, bringing in the Danish companies and so on, to be collaborative partners. Because to be honest, you asked me the question about how much do we save of carbon footprint in the embassy. Our embassy is on the 11th floor in Seoul Square building. It's newly renovated. It's not much we can do. Lighting and air conditioning has been decided for, and it actually is in pretty good shape now, I would say. So it's not like when I was in Tanzania, we had an old embassy using a lot of power for air conditioning. And when we filled the roof with solar panels, we produced the energy for our own air conditioning and computers. That was a good story for me back then. So I think my footprint here is less so on the embassy, but far more about creating the links between Denmark and Korea and giving Korea the opportunity to be the front runner in Asia. And there's so many jobs out there. We calculated 14,000 jobs per gigawatt in Denmark. If you multiply by 12 gigawatt you're planning here, 150, 200,000 jobs, easily. It could be more. And I think Korea will be a fast runner. You've always been a fast runner. And a fast learner as well. Thank you very much. 감사합니다.
예, 고맙습니다.
Thank you very much to both of our presenters. Thank you for providing us with the very detailed answer. I was actually going to ask you a follow-up question, but the person who submitted the question actually deleted the question afterwards, so we do not have any additional questions. We do have some more questions on the list, but I believe that those questions were answered through the previous answer that you shared with us. So now that brings us to the end of the session today. We've heard from two presenters, and we've also heard from two discussants. In closing, I would like to depart by saying that when it comes to ESG and carbon neutrality, all of this relates to future. And future, it is all about people. When I visited Germany, I saw their dual system in play. And basically, they were training these students in vocational training. And I asked them, what's the purpose of running this type of a training system? And their response was, he was a manager at Chamber of Commerce. And he responded by saying that the people that we train could be used by my town or my neighboring town or at the government level. So it's a priority for the nation to really train these young human resources because that's beneficial to the community as a whole. So they don't consider these people as people who they would use to work for them, but they view it as really training valuable human resources. And I visited Copenhagen as well, and I participated in a seminar where they talked about how in Denmark to bring innovation to the cities. They shared with us how much investment they were making with regards to 14 different regions in Denmark. I understand that they participated in the seminar and shared their experience in making investment in training human resources. I think that in the upcoming era of carbon neutrality and in training human resources, I think these two countries have a lot to share with us, and there are a lot of lessons that we can learn in Korea.
아이누 옌센 대사님께서 결국은
And also, Ambassador Jensen emphasized the importance in between the agreement and consensus between the government and the industry, as well as the partnership between different states. There were many things that were mentioned today, and I feel that at least when it comes to carbon neutrality, Korea cannot be said to be a front runner. And there's going to be impact on our labor market and our industries. And we really do need to move very quickly. And I feel that the two panel, the discussants, are really the researchers who are opening new ways for us in Korea. And I believe partnership with countries like Germany and Denmark would be important. And at CRIVET, I hope that our gathering will not end here today, but that our gathering will be a start of a more closer cooperation with the two respective countries going forward. Ambassador Jensen, you also talked about how the partnership with Korea, you want to see that become more closer. And I think through that alliance, through the cooperation, I think we can really build a close tie. Thank you very much to all of the participants, both via online and offline. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. And also, my gratitude goes to the person who asked questions, people who asked questions. But my particular thanks goes to our two presenters and two discussants. And we had a former Prime Minister of Denmark who've joined us. After the keynote, former Prime Minister really shared with us a very important insight, and I took note of that. And later, in other occasions, I'm going to borrow what he said, and really, because that was very, I guess, impressive. So once again, thank you very much. My deep gratitude to everyone. This brings me to the end of Trek C-1. Thank you.
네, 녹색 전환의 출발점에 위치한 우리가 좀 더
This was an informative session for us to think about various ways as we embark on this green journey. Let's have a big hand once again for our four distinguished speakers and panelists. This marks the end of C1. Until 2:20, we will have a lunch break. I will see you back here at 2:20 for the afternoon session. Thank you.